Greetings to you all in the precious name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Today we have reached Genesis chapter 8. Let's go through this chapter. Verse 1 says, Then God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the animals that were in with him in the ark. God made wind to pass over the earth and the waters subsided. Here we see God remember Noah, the word. This is the God's covenant with Noah brought provision and protection in the midst of severe judgment. The remnant was preserved and God initiated steps towards re-establishing the created order on the earth. The waters have subsided. God used the wind to dry the ground. Evaporation returned water to the atmosphere. If you see this, the wind, this is the same word used in Jonah when he was trying to escape from Nineveh to Tarshish. He used the same word. He used the same method of passing the wind to the ship. Verse 4 says, The ark rested in the seventh month, in the 17th day of the month, on the mountains of Ararat. These are the regions of where in the present Turkey were elevated exceeded 17,000 feet. The mountain range in the modern eastern Turkey today is the highest peak, and the wording of the text refers to the range. We know from verse 7 to 12, Noah sends a raven and a dove. Here, ravens survive on the broad range of food types. If any food was available outside the ark, the raven could survive. In contrast, a dove is much more selective in its food choice. The dove choice of food would indicate that new life had begun to grow. Thus, Noah and his family could also survive outside the ark. From verse 14 to 16, Noah and his family had been in the ark for more than 370 plus days. You can read it from chapter 7, verse 4, 10, and 11. From verse 17 to 19, we can observe the words, Be fruitful and multiply. In the process of replenishing the creation order that he had judged with destruction, God repeated the words of blessing which he had put upon non human creations. Noah faced a new world where longevity of the life began to decline immediately. The earth was subjected to storms and severe weather, blazing heat, freezing cold, and natural disasters. This is the map where Noah's Ark touched land in the mountains of Ararat, located in the modern day Turkey. There it rested for almost 8 months before Noah, his family, and animals stepped onto dry land. If you observe the section from chapter 8, verse 22, chapter 9, verse 17, God's Noah covenant was established. It is the promise to never again destroy the earth and its inhabitants with flood. This is a God's promise given to whole humankind. A promise he has kept to this day. God sealed this promise with a rainbow, a sign that God keeps his promise. Verse 20 says, The Noah built an altar to the Lord and took of every clean animal and every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. If you see here, this was done an act of worship in response to God's covenant faithfulness in sparing Noah and his family. Verse 21 says, God smelled a smooth, soothing aroma. Then the Lord said to his heart, I will never curse again the ground for man's sake, although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I destroy everything as I have done. God accepted Noah's sacrifice regardless of how sinful mankind would become in the future. God promised not to engage in global catastrophe by flood again. Verse 22, While the earth remains seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. With the many alteration from the global flood, God re-established the cycle of seasons after the catastrophic interruption. I listed a chart between the first beginning and the second beginning. The similarities. By saving Noah and his family, God gave humanity a second chance. I'll read out the similarities between the first beginning and the second beginning. God's action in the first beginning. God created Adam and Eve from the dust. God saved Noah and his family from the destruction. God's provision. In the first beginning, God planted the garden and gave Adam and Eve to eat plants. God saved animal species along with Noah, and God gave Noah and his family animals for food. God's blessing in first case: be fruitful and multiply, have dominion over all living things. Same way in the second beginning: be fruitful and multiply, all living things will be filled with fear and dread of you. God's covenant in case of second beginning: never again will God destroy the earth with flood. He will always provide the annual seasons. God's prohibition in first case: do not eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And the second case: do not shed the blood of any person. God's warning in first beginning: those who eat of it will die. In the second beginning: of those who shed blood, God will demand a reckoning. And God's evaluation in the first beginning: it is very good. And in the second beginning, the humanity heart is always evil. This is the chronology of the flood. If you see from the beginning, 7 days from the time Noah entered ark until the flood began, 40 days night during the rain, 150 days from the time of rain began until the waters decreased and the ark rested on Mount Ararat, 224 days from the beginning of the flood until the mountain tops reappeared, 40 days from the time mountain tops were seen until Noah sent out a raven, 7 days from sending of raven, the first beginning, first sending forth of a dove, and another 7 days until the dove sent forth second time, 7 more days until Phylon sending forth of dove. Total 314 days from the beginning of the flood until Noah removed the covering from the ark, and a total 370 plus days from the beginning of the flood until earth was dried, and at this time Noah commanded to get out of the ark to the dry land.